My name is Yong. I head up the policy and planning team in EMA, as mentioned. Today, I'll be sharing a little bit about what we are doing from Singapore's perspective on demand side management, right? With particular emphasis on buildings. Just will give you a bit of background, followed by two major aspects of the demand side management. Firstly, is on the energy efficiency, and then which I understand was covered yesterday, and then a bit more details on flexibility. Okay, so just a bit of background. So Singapore, we recognize that climate change is an existential crisis for us, and it's important for us. So we have actually set out a target of achieving net zero by on around mid-century. This was announced earlier this year. And the power sector will be an important contributor to this because we have about 40% of Singapore's emissions, which comes from the power sector. So one of the issues when we look at power energy policy is balancing the trilemma. So when we talk about lowering climate change, lowering carbon emissions, we talk about the sustainability angle of the trilemma. But on that, we're also very focused on how do we manage affordability for consumers as well as ensuring security for the system. So I will just confirm that you guys can see my slides, or okay, if it's okay, then okay.
Yeah, we can see your slide. You're perhaps speaking a bit low. If you could speak a bit louder, I suppose it would help.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so last year we actually launched the Singapore Energy Transition, which is a multi-pronged strategy towards achieving a sustainable future for the power sector. And this will cover all aspects of the power sector, beyond supply to grid and demand as well. So here I list out some of the key strategies that were identified. I won't go into the details, but we'll focus a little bit more particularly in this presentation on demand side strategies in terms of managing demand as well as shaping consumption patterns. And buildings will be critically important in this effort on demand side management because from our electricity consumption in Singapore, we see that almost 40% comes from commercial buildings. So they play a key role and they have a significant potential to help decarbonize as well as provide additional flexibility to the grid. So first, very quickly looking at energy efficiency. So I won't go into the details. I understand that you guys have already went deeply into energy efficiency previously, but we highlight some more important aspects that Singapore is looking at in terms of green building design, on-site generation of renewable energy, building management systems to optimize operations, as well as district cooling. So a couple of key initiatives that have been launched in Singapore over the years. One would be the introduction of the super low energy building scheme to encourage buildings owners to actually design and develop their buildings in the most efficient way to help reduce the energy consumption. And secondly, the introduction of district cooling. So back in 2006, Singapore launched our first district cooling system in our Marina Bay downtown area, which is now the world's largest underground district cooling network. So this actually allows buildings to reduce the amount of consumption from cooling loads. In particular, beyond just increasing efficiency, they also provide a potential for flexibility because if you can see in this picture, we have what we call thermal storage tanks. So this is something actually present in all the district cooling plants within the Marina Bay area. And these are basically giant ice tanks. And because instead of focusing on providing electricity, this system is focused on providing cooling load. We can actually store energy in the form of ice instead of storing energy in terms of batteries, etc., which are growing in efficiency today, but it's still very expensive. This is actually an alternative way of storing energy in the form of cooling loads. And then this ice could then be used to produce cooled water, chilled water for cooling loads in the later part of the day. So it's something that's very interesting from a flexibility point of view. So next we're going to focus a little bit more on unlocking building flexibility. And in particular, we look at different types of benefits that what can flexibility bring. So one type of flexibility is what we call load shedding, where you can actually reduce the amount of loads at a certain time. The second is load shifting, where there's no absolute reduction in the amount of energy consumed, but shifted from one time period to the other, usually from a peak to off-peak period. And lastly, on capacity firming, this is if your load from a consumer actually fluctuates high and low, and actually using some form of technologies, etc., we can firm up and smoothen the load, and this will actually reduce the amount of impact on the grid. We see a number of different technologies and solutions that will allow us to provide this kind of flexibility. I won't go into the details, but this ranges from behavioral changes to smart energy management systems, the use of distributed energy resources like backup generators, energy storage, and electric vehicles, as well as microgrids. And the question I guess you will ask is, what's the benefit from the grid's perspective? And so we see three major contributions that the grid can benefit from increased demand flexibility. So again, flattening the load profile will allow us to reduce the amount of grid capacity that is required to be put in the system to serve a certain load, because most grid capacity is designed not for average load or total load, but actually for peak loads. Secondly, you can actually provide localized load management. This is especially important as we move away from a centralized system where power is generated from, say, one end of the country and transported to the other end. When electricity is generated much more locally, that could provide actually overloads on the local capacities. And so localized load management could be a useful tool for grid operators. And thirdly, on the system level, there'll be importance for load management as well. So as we see more renewable generation coming in, more intermittent generation, the demand and supply can become more intermittent, can fluctuate more, and we may need to have more forms of flexibility in the grid. And demand response and other kind of demand side management tools will help us to provide this kind of flexibility. And so I'll talk through a little bit about three specific solutions that Singapore is exploring to provide such solutions. So for example, the first one is localized peak shaving with energy storage systems. So this is actually a regulatory sandbox project between the EMA, the Energy Market Authority, as well as the Singapore Power, our local power grid operator in Singapore. So this sandbox actually meant to test the usefulness of energy storage systems in helping to shave peak loads at the local substation level. And this will potentially have the benefit of shaving off sufficient peak load at peak hours that will reduce the requirements to install new substation and transformer equipment to meet higher loads. So this is something that with the results have shown that it's technically feasible, but the CBA may not be workable at this point in time because of the high cost of energy storage. But the technologies and the software that have been tested in this solution could be usable once energy storage solutions become cheaper. The second is something that is quite traditional around many different jurisdictions, which is the interruptible load scheme. So we've introduced the interruptible load scheme all the way back in 2004 for consumers to participate in the reserves market. And this allows consumers to basically offer their services to be on standby in the event of trippings by power generators, etc. And then they can actually cut back their loads to help stabilize the power system. So this is important because this allows the system to have multiple sources of managing the demand supply imbalance, and potentially at a cheaper cost than generators can provide, and can also help to lower the cost of provision of electricity services in the market. So this is something that is very important, it has growing importance as we move into a more flexible power system. However, what we see in Singapore is today, there is not strong demand for this service at this point in time. And that is some of the feedback that we're receiving is that there's some uncertainty in terms of how long consumers will have to be out for in order for them to be provided such services. And the cost of the energy is too low to justify the benefits of such schemes. So these are things that we're looking at the current point in time. And another scheme that we're introducing, we introduced back in 2015 that we're looking into more detail is demand response. So the difference between demand response and interruptible load is that interruptible load is a scheme that is meant to respond to outages. So it's meant as a security scheme. For demand response, it's different. It's actually demand side bidding. It's actually meant to respond to high price events, and the consumer can actually choose to cut back their demand during periods of high prices, and this will then allow our the market price to go down, and everybody can benefit from the lower market prices. So this is interesting in that it's a bit more interactive and a bit more frequent than your outage solutions, and this actually potentially can give higher benefits to consumers. So one of the things we've identified is that in most schemes, the argument is that consumers actually benefit from savings by not consuming energy on its own. But to a consumer, that's insufficient incentive for them to actually contribute back to the grid through additional flexibility. So the scheme was actually designed that consumers can actually earn a portion of the benefit that the entire market benefits from the reduction in pool prices, and actually they get a share of this, and yet the whole market, the system as a whole benefits because of the lower wholesale prices. Again, the track record that we have seen for interruptible and demand response schemes so far is that there's been limited take-up, and so that's something that we're currently exploring. The reasons could be, again, many reasons, but it could be from low prices as well as the difficulty in actually implementing such technologies in their own operations. However, with the current high prices in fuel markets, this could potentially become more attractive for consumers. So we're waiting to see how the response for this will grow as time goes by. So this is basically a very brief sharing of some of the key initiatives that Singapore is doing. Happy to share more and take more questions later during any discussions. Thanks.